Thank you, Elizabeth. How's everybody doing? So getting a little late in the season. Once we start seeing some freezing temperatures, we shouldn't expect too many mushrooms growing out there. There's a few that like the cold weather, lion's mane, the Flammulina velutees. It's like the little velvet foot. You know them as anokis in the stores. We may have another foray here or there. We just, Tom just led a lichen walk, which was nice. And so we might have another of those. But anyway, the forays are going to start tapering down at this point. All right, so let's get started. So anyway, we're going to start with some edibles, just a few here. So this is submitted by Corey Cohn. He found these in DC. These have been up, they're still up, a few here and there, some are starting to go, so they've kind of had a little bit of an extended season. I think they liked these rains recently. So this is one of the honey mushrooms. I call this one the brown honey mushroom. I don't think that's an official like common name or anything, but in my mind, because honey mushrooms are still kind of going through a lot of changes and DNA studies, and sometimes they might be a little tough to identify. I've just kind of grouped them into like the darker kind of brown type honey mushrooms, your yellowy honey mushrooms, and your ringless honey mushrooms. So this is Armillaria stoyae, I believe. In the stipe here, you can see it's kind of got some of this greenish coloration happening. This is pretty common in a lot of the honey mushrooms. So honey mushrooms have white spores. You can see it's got this fairly membranous partial veil here. Something like Melia, even some of the Astoya, when they're just opening up, sometimes you'll even see kind of a cobwebby looking veil as it's opening. Some have a little bit more membranous. Some have bulbous bases, some have tapered bases because they grow cespitose, which is in a cluster, kind of like a bouquet, a bit like this one. So Carrie Raditz submitted this one. You can see this is a much yellower mushroom, but it's still a honey mushroom. And in fact, I believe the honey from this yellow, this is your typical honey mushroom. They can grow in huge clusters at the bases of trees. You can see here, this is the remnants of the partial veil. It's a bit more ephemeral. You can't even see what's left of this one. It looks like it's just kind of broken off. These are looking a little decurrent, but usually they're not quite looking quite so decurrent. Here you can see a nice ring in the back there. Anyway, these are Armillaria mellia. These are your true honey mushrooms. Sometimes if you see bark peeling off of trees and you see these black little streaks on there, it's kind of like hard rhizomorphs. That's actually the mycelium of a certain honey mushroom. Some of the honey mushrooms actually have bioluminescent hyphae, so they don't bioluminesce themselves, but the hyphae do in the wood. So if you happen to be out and it's been raining and it's dark, you might actually see kind of some logs, especially peeling back the bark, glowing green. That'd be a honey mycelium. And to round it out, this one was submitted by Adelaide Armstrong. She found this at her bus stop. Not the best image, but it's getting old and starting to rot. You can see it must be starting to stink too because it's attracting a couple of flies. This is, it used to be Armillaria tubescens. They've changed it to Des Armillaria cespitosa. This is the ringless honey. So this tends to have a little darker coloration, more like the brown honeys from the first one. And if you look close, it tends to have a bit of a decurrent gills with no ring or ring zone on any of them. This one's a little bit worse for wear. I can't be certain, but I think that's what this one is. These can be extremely common. Sometimes they look like they're growing in the yard, just on the lawns and grass and stuff like that. And it's just growing from some old decaying roots that you can't see. So it looks like they're terrestrial, but they're actually growing from wood. All the honeys are edible. If you do eat them, make sure they're cooked well. They can't upset people's stomachs. Moving on from that, John McKinley Ward submitted this guy, and this is actually kind of related to honeys. A lot of people, when I first joined, nobody ever called them shrimp of the woods, but it seems like that one's starting to pick up. So people are calling this shrimp of the woods. This is actually Entoloma abertivum. So it's not actually an Entoloma mushroom. It's actually a honey mushroom that is being consumed by the Entoloma abertivum fungus. So you can see this one looks a bit like a puffball. Breaking it open, it doesn't look like a puffball inside. So they kind of have almost a cucumbery smell. They can look different than this. You can see that from this one submitted by Corey Cohn. So this is another Entoloma abertivum. Sometimes you can even find the honey mushrooms growing fine, a little cluster of some of your aborted forms, and the Entoloma mushroom growing in the same clusters. The Entoloma mushroom is a gray mushroom, kind of usually when you find it's starting to get a little pinkish on the gills, because Entolomas have pinkish spores. Smells just the same. Some Entolomas can upset your stomach, so don't go around willy-nilly eating Entoloma mushrooms. But if you find it growing in with this, and it looks like gray with the kind of pinkish gills, has that same aroma, you can be pretty sure that it is Entoloma abertivum, the actual Entoloma mushroom. It's kind of fun finding all three together. All right, next one, another submitted by Corey. Found these in DC. This was the only two images, so I'm not certain what species to put on here, but I went ahead and called it Pleurotus ostriatus. Looks like this one has kind of some gray coloration in the cap. You've seen, if you've seen some of the table IDs, we've had quite a few different oysters, and there's a summer oyster that tends to be lighter colored. It's pretty much white. It has more developed stipe or stem, and this one here, you can see it's starting to kind of grow out. But considering this was probably a little cooler weather, it looks like it has some gray coloration. It may be ostriatus. This one tends to be a bit more hardy. The flesh is a little hardier. This is a nice little cluster though. He found it. You don't even see the little black beetles crawling around in the gills. It's a pretty common find, the little black beetles with red markings on them, chowing down on oyster mushrooms. All right, this one was submitted by Don. I'm not sure who he was, because he sends, some of his emails were showing up and it just had a phone number, and so I didn't know. So if you are sending me stuff, don't forget to tell me your name. That way I'll know who sent me the photo. These have been having a pretty good year. We saw some at the fair. We saw some at for a couple of forays. You can see here, I'm not sure if it's just the image or maybe it just kind of got smushed, but there may even be a little bit of blue staining happening right here. So he found this one in Edgartown, Great Pond in Martha's Vineyard. Must be nice. Zooming in a little closer here, you can see it has a ring here on the stipe. It's actually almost looking a little decurrent. This usually doesn't have decurrent gills. It's only because it's the cap is starting to turn up a little bit. A lot of times you'll see these guys with the swollen base. This is actually one of the big laughing gems. So this is Gymnopolis junonius. That's a tentative name. They can be a little bit hard to get to species. Luteus is another one that tends to be a bit smaller. But I think it has more of a slender stalk, and you don't have that kind of bulbous in the, growing out in the center like that. So this would have a rusty spore print. It can look a little bit like jack-o'-lanterns. This one tends to be not quite as orange, has a bit more yellow tones. Some of them smell just fantastic. So if you see something like this, give it a whiff and see if it smells really good.
Mitch, I saw a few of those this week, and none of them were bluing. And I was just wondering whether, it seems to be that people are calling this subspectaculus now. I was wondering whether anybody online has researched this deeply and might comment on what it is that we're seeing around the DC area.
I'm throwing them all in Junoneus or Luteus. I think they're still doing work to figure out and separate different species. Some I've found have had clear blue staining. And so we're talking about the blue staining reaction. They call this the big laughing gem because some collections actually do contain psilocybin and psilocin. They're very bitter. But so those are the active compounds in hallucinogenic mushrooms. Some collections can have it and some don't. And I don't know that it's been distinguished that like this collection is a different species, so it doesn't contain it. Or if it's like its growing conditions and this one has some maybe, but just not a whole lot. I'm not sure that that's necessarily been worked out. But some collections you can find have like clear blue staining on them and some of them don't. So I'm personally not certain of that. I don't know if anybody else on here has done any more research into that.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of activity on it. So if you're looking at these kinds of mushrooms, you might go online and look at some of the mushroom identification websites to talk about the distinctions that are being drawn here. Annie, are we doing DNA sequencing on these, to your knowledge?
Yeah, we definitely have some gems that have made it into our queue. So I know we were extracting DNA from some of them a couple weekends ago. We don't have all those results yet, but when we do, I think we'll be sharing some results next month.
That's great.
So.
Yeah, that is awesome.
I found some, by the way, on Massachusetts Avenue, side of the road. They're probably still there because they were there yesterday. And they were so blue.
Really?
They were blue without even touching it. The caps were blue.
That's
were just
cool.
Amazing.
It was wild.
I found ones that are all yellow but huge, so that they can't be the luteus, but they're not bluing at all. And so I just, it seems like there's some confusion out there about what they are.
I think there's something like 30 or 40 species.
And that's why I'm giving up identifying.
But now I say that, but I'm also including some of those little like Sapinius type mushrooms. So it's like you wouldn't confuse that for this, but there's a bunch of species. They're not all big and look alike. Some are very different. Some are, on different continents and stuff like that. But altogether, I think there's around 30 or 40, and I don't think that they've worked out exactly what we have here. And I'm not advanced enough to be able to distinguish that. So
DNA committee, we're looking forward to your results.
That'd be awesome. It'd be kind of cool if you could find like a very, like that one, very blue staining, and one that has like no blue staining, and sequence them both especially if they look just the same, and see if there's any difference. It might just be environmental.
I dried mine. We got them done already for
cool.
Anyone wants to sequence them. Yeah.
I found this ones a couple weeks ago too. They're always within 100 yards of where I found them the previous year, but it's like always in the grass and never in the same spot. It's really weird.
They're very prolific spore producers too. They tend to like pump them out. There's always like that rustiness all around them and stuff. But if anybody finds these, give them a whiff. I think they smell great.
they smelled like good edible mushrooms to me when
They're
the ones
quite
I
bitter if you
recently
taste them.
collected, and left a huge spore print in my trunk.
All right, so moving on. This one was submitted by Elizabeth Axley, found in a grassy lawn. Happens to be the same environment that you would find something like Agaricus campestris, the pink bottoms, or the field mushrooms. Those are good, tasty, edible mushrooms, but that is not what we have here. So if you look closer, this guy has a ring, so it's kind of adheres to similar things to Agaricus campestris. Kind of has a whitish tan cap. This one is usually a little more yellow than this. It'll have dark spores, but the dark spores of this one are more of a purple color. The ring on these typically have very distinct striations on them. It's basically like when the cap is young, the gills are stuck to that ring, and as they open up, they leave these little lines all along the ring there. Looks like it almost looks like it leaves eroded looking gill margins, which is kind of like the serrated looking. I don't know that I've seen them this serrated looking. This frilly fringed edge is also remnants of that partial veil. It's pretty classic. Usually Agaricus would have larger patches like that. So, but this one has a purple blackish spore print, whereas Agaricus doesn't have that chocolate brown. This is Stropharia coronella. They call it the garland roundhead. I'm not exactly sure why they call it that, but that's one of the common names. This one will make you sick. So make sure if you happen to be trying to pick Agaricus campestris that you don't have some of these Stropharia coronellas. A lot of times they'll be more yellow than this, and Agaricus campestris tends to be much whiter on the top. Sometimes it'll have some brown markings. But just be aware of that.
Mitch, this seems a little out of season to me to see Cornella. Is that?
Fall, and like I said, these, I don't remember, I didn't put the dates on here. It's been 2 months, so some of these might be a little older. So
Yeah.
that may be one of the reasons.
Easily confused with the campestris, grow in the same location at the same time, in my experience, and the best you can do in addition to the spore print is it gets a little bit of yellowing in the center, which can cause you to be suspicious.
The caps tend to be much yellower. Sometimes you saw that one looked a little faded. All right, so Ralph Dachner sent this one in. He found that at Great Falls Park in Virginia. Beautiful purple little mushrooms here. These can be extremely common. One thing that you can note immediately is along this rim. I don't know if you guys can see it very well, but it's a little rusty colored, and that should tell you something. Moving on. Kind of hard to tell. Usually these are more viscid, so they're more kind of slimy on the top. It might have just been kind of drier conditions. So they're looking a little more silky. You can kind of see a white spot right there. Here again, on the zone here, the ring zone, you see a little bit of that rustiness. So this is actually a Cortinarius. I'm calling it Cortinarius ioides, but I can't be too sure. So you call it the spotted quart, and you can see this light coloration on the cap. Sometimes there's a lot of these white colorations on the cap. Fairly common, can come up in abundance. Rusty spores, and they're Cortinarius because they have a cortina. It's partial veil. Instead of being like that membranous thing or a pretty substantial ring, it's just that cobwebby veil. And as it opens, it just kind of leaves this ring zone here. And sometimes it catches the rusty spores. So there's one that can look very similar, Cortinarius ioides. And apparently, if you just give it a lick, right there on the cap surface. The regular iodes is fairly mild, whereas the iodes, wherever you want to say it, tends to be bitter, but they can look almost identical. Anyway, there are a few mushrooms that you can kind of eke out a little bit closer to ID by tasting them. All right, April Wyman sent this one in. I believe they were on a walk from Shenandoah to Mary's Rock. I am not the best at the Earth stars, so I put a tentative ID of this one as Yastrum sacchatum. So the Earth stars are one of the gastromycetes. And basically what that means, it's kind of, they call it the stomach fungi. So your puffballs, your Earth stars, your stinkhorns, instead of having gills or teeth or pores, their spores are produced in a gleba, and it's contained inside this like membranous sac. And so when you rip open a puffball and it's got that white stuff in it, that's the gleba, and it's going to eventually start turning and maturing into spores. And so this one is covered by this outer like peridium that protects it, and as it matures, it'll break open and expose this kind of puffball looking thing in here to the elements, and they'll, as the spores mature, they basically are very similar to puffballs, where the rain will drop on there and it'll puff out its spores out of the little holes there. Now there's a few things that you can look for in trying to ID some of the Earth stars. Some of them, it's like how many arms it has, the coloration of this kind of beak thing. Sometimes there's like a little depression in here. Sometimes the beaks don't have these little lines. Some have little extra collars in them. There's one called the barometer Earth star, and it is basically kind of hygroscopic. And so when it gets moist, the little arms turn down, and it actually lifts it off the ground so that it will be exposed to the water droplets as they're falling. And when it dries out, it kind of goes back down to kind of protect it. But anyway, this may be sacchatum. I'm not exactly sure that that's what this one is, but that one's fairly common. Always like finding this. I probably bug foray goers and like, oh guys, looking at these little tiny bitty things growing on a piece of wood. So April Wyman found these on her same walk. These are just tiny little balls on stalks, but they are called the fenugreek stalk ball. Pleogena phagenia. I'm guessing I have found them on beech trees quite often, so that's probably one of their preferred hosts, and that's where you get its species name. It's just a little basidiomycete, very hard to see because they're very, very tiny. But apparently, if you collect these, I've tried smelling them in the woods, no smell. I need to collect them, let them dry out, and then smell them. And apparently, they smell like fenugreek. I've never been able to smell it though. Maybe one of these days. Another cool, teeny tiny little thing, but this one's much more distinct. This is Multiclavula muscida. So this is kind of like a little club fungi. It's pretty tiny. It's a couple of millimeters. Always growing on like a green algae like this. Some of these in this genus tend to be lichenized. I don't think this one has an actual photobiont. You know, it's little algae growing there. See, Tom, I'm learning some stuff on your lichen foray. Anyway, this is pretty distinct, and you can see they're always very separated. You don't see them clustered too often. They do branch sometimes, but anyway, that's kind of a fun little club fungi to find.
Just a quick note on that one, Mitch. The most lichenologists lump that multiclavula, consider it to be a lichen. It's a little bit different than other lichens, where the algae that it's consuming is free living on top of that wood rather than embedded into the thallus. But they've just kind of by default lumped them in with other lichens. And it's one of the, I think there's only 2 basidiomycete lichens that I know of in the Northeast, and that's one of them. So it's kind of rare in that regard too.
Apparently they have a few others in that genus that are actually like truly lichenized, right? Like they actually have photobionts in them. It's just a different genus, a different species.
I need to research that. I didn't know.
That's cool. Anyway, they're fun to find. And they're kind of striking. Like they're tiny, but there's usually a bunch of them. So you're like, what the heck is that? A bunch of little white things over there. All right, another one submitted by Corey. I think I missed. That was probably another DC one. I think I forgot to change that location. But anyway, this here is a pretty common thing that we're finding often nowadays. They're calling it Radiolomyces copelandii. They used to call it Radulodon or Asian beauty because this is actually an Asian species that seems to have leaped over to our continent. There's a couple of things that can kind of look like it. Let me zoom in here. This one tends to have kind of white on the tips of the teeth. And sometimes they're flattened instead of pointy. So I'm pretty sure that's what this one is. It's resupinate, meaning it's growing flush against whatever the substrate that it's growing on. And you can see kind of that growing edge right here. And so it's just kind of growing flat along the wood there. It's very common. You'll often see it growing in the furrows of bark of fallen trees now. And we find it all the time now. When I first started foraging here, I don't think we ever saw this. And now it's like all over the place. It's really spread rapidly. Anyway, it's kind of cool looking. It's another one of the tooth fungi. And this one here, I think a lot of you guys have seen these. This is the wood ear mushroom. So this is auricularia. It used to be auriculae. And they've shown that it's not the same species. So they're calling the one here Auricularia americana. There's actually another one depending on what it's growing on, conifer or deciduous wood. This is, it's kind of gelatinous. One side, the outer surface tends to be a little fuzzy. It is edible, and when you're eating like hot and sour soup and you got those little black strips in there, that's a different species, but it's also a wood ear fungus. It also has blood thinning properties. Always a cool find. These tiny little cups. These are probably, I couldn't really tell, but they're probably around half a centimeter or so. Susan Kren found these in Shenandoah. I'm calling them Scutellinius scutellata, but I may be wrong. There are 30 or 40 of these little guys. Some are more yellow, some are more orange, some are small, some are large. The substrate can be different. Another thing you need to do is kind of look at the spores, or you can look at whether the backside's fuzzy or how far apart. So these are eyelash cups because this dark rim around it, if you were able to look closer, I would have zoomed in, but it's kind of blurry. So I didn't do that, but they'll have little eyelashes, little hairs all along the edge. And so you can measure how long those hairs are or how many hairs per millimeter. And that can kind of lead you to different species. Scutellinius scutellata is pretty common, and it's one of the larger ones, and it tends to be a bit more orange red. So that's why I threw that on there. All right. Hope you guys had a nice Halloween. April Wyman sent this one over. Some of you guys might even be able to see this growing on your front porch. Hopefully not, but it's probably getting a little stinky. I'm not certain because I didn't know what the heck this was, so I looked it up. This may be Didymelia brionia. They call it black rot on pumpkins and other squash. It's actually a pretty bad plant disease. So if you do get it, you have to like rotate your crops to not grow your squash in that area and stuff like that. But it's a pretty common black rot on pumpkins. So that may be what that is. But like I said, I'm not too good at some of these smuts and rusts and molds and stuff like this. And lastly, Tom McCoy sent this over. It's not an actual mushroom, but it's a mushroom statue that he saw in Antigua, Guatemala. And if you want to say a couple things about it, Tom.
Sure. Thanks, Mitch. Okay. As Mitch said, I was in Antigua, Guatemala like 2 months ago, and I happened to be visiting a 5-star hotel there that's called the Santo Domingo. And in that place, they have a couple of museums. Anyhow, as I was touring one of the museums of the indigenous arts, they had a picture of this. Just a quick note, even though this looks phallic, it's not that. There was actually a title behind it that said Hongos en Piedra, which means stone mushrooms. And this all ties back to the indigenous peoples in Mesoamerica. So I'll give a little background on that. Of the 180 plus magic mushroom species in the world, a non-trivial amount of them are native to Mesoamerica, which is modern day Mexico and Central America. So the native peoples there have a very, very long history of experimenting with those particular species. So much so that it was really a integral part of their culture. The Aztecs used them religiously and even named them Teonanacatl, which is in the Aztec language, Nahuatl, means flesh of the gods. So whenever Hernan Cortez showed up at Tenochtitlan, which is modern day Mexico, that was the Aztec capital. He'd never seen anything like it. I mean, the population was as large as any city, or larger than any city in Europe except for Paris. I mean, just couldn't believe what he saw. But the thing that really shocked him the most was the religious use of psychedelic mushrooms. And in typical Spanish colonial draconian fashion, once they had to run of things, they outlawed those under penalty of death. So the Aztecs had a very rich history with these things that far preceded them. The Mayans were using these things for thousands of years into the past. These Mayan mushroom stones, I think the oldest one, I just tried to Google it. They said that it goes back to 3000 before Common Era, and the probably the world's most famous mycologist, Paul Stamets, has a huge collection of these things. I just Googled it before, and it says he has 200 of these mushrooms in his collection. So anyhow, I thought I'd just keep things lively because we get lots of pictures of oyster mushrooms and chicken mushrooms every month. So a little change of pace.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's cool. Anyway, thanks everybody for the submissions. You can always send mushroom pictures to forays@MAWDC. Appreciate it. And I'm going to pass it on to Annie, and she's going to talk about the bingo.
Good. Thank you so much, Mitch. That was awesome. I'm just going to be really fast here. But I wanted to announce that like right under the wire, we got a winner for our bingo contest.
Yay.
The fall Ma iNaturalist bingo. And I had a great time with it. I thought it was really fun. So this was the bingo card, and I won't go through all the stuff on it, but you can see I tried to mix things up so it wasn't easy to get a bingo. Like it wasn't the kind of thing you would have right away. And you had to do the observation after our last meeting. So even if you had observed some of it before, it wouldn't count. So we got this was the bingo, the winning bingo looked like this. They found a Pydnum species, which is a hedgehog mushroom. They found a Lepista nuda or Clitosobe nuda in some of the books that is a bluet mushroom, beautiful, and they've been out in full force where I've been. Sterium complicatum, Entomoma abortivum, which is the shrimp of the woods mushroom that Mitch was talking about. And then also Armillaria melia, which is the yellow honey mushroom, kind of classic honey mushroom. And I made it hard because there are a lot of other Armillaria species, but it had to be this one specifically. So the winner was Elizabeth Axley, who also was one of the submitters in our identification slideshow tonight. And she just emailed me literally yesterday that she had a bingo. So great job, Elizabeth. Really stoked that we got such great participation. Yes, major props to Elizabeth, but also to everybody who participated, because there were people breathing down her neck. Like a lot of people had a lot of cool observations. And
Hi,
then
I'm actually
go
here.
ahead.
I'm on my
Congratulations.
dad's Zoom. Hi,
Yay.
sorry, I was in a car accident today, so I've been kind of all over the place. So
Oh,
he called me down to get this part. So thank
I'm
you
so
much.
sorry that happened. Are you okay?
Okay, yeah, I'm fine.
Oh,
This was
good. Thank
awesome.
goodness.
It was such a motivator to go out this month and to like go and see like more species, like especially the ones that like they're there, and I just didn't find them. It was driving me crazy. I literally only got it on the last day, but this was an awesome challenge, and thank you so much, Annie, for like making this. This was amazing.
Thank you. And your picks were great. You've had awesome observations just generally in our project, but you did a great job in this game. So we can talk offline and you can give me the best way to get your prize to you, but it's this book that I really like. It's by Michael Kuo, who I'm sure you all look at his website all the time, which is mushroomexpert.com. And the only downside to his website is it includes no edibility information and a lot of legal disclaimers. But he did write this terrific book, and it's not just a book about edible mushrooms, it also has a ton of recipes for each mushroom. So it's a great book. I really like it. So let me know, Elizabeth, how I can get it to you. We'll figure that out. And
thank you so much, Annie.
Yeah, no, great job. Thank you. And hopefully we'll get more participants joining up. I'll announce our next spring bingo. I don't think we'll do a winter bingo. That would be like a little depressing. Although I'm sure a lot of us will be out rolling logs all winter. But anyway, so we'll do a fun spring bingo and get some new species in there. And I want to make this a regular thing because I thought it was a lot of fun too. So thank you, Elizabeth, for saying hi, and great job. Congratulations.
Thanks. Sorry to just pop in here, but thanks.